This is the story of the many victims of Britain's first known female serial killer, Mary Ann Cotton. She was born Mary Ann Robson on the 31st of October 1832, in the West Rainton district of County Durham, North England. In those days, the North relied heavily upon mining for employment. Coal had been the driving force behind the Industrial Revolution and remained a critically important commodity. Miners were nonetheless pretty low on the social scale. Mary's father was a colliery sinker, which meant he was responsible for cutting new vertical mine shafts. This made him a member of the mining aristocracy, because this was a highly skilled occupation, and a very dangerous one. When Mary was 8 years old, the family relocated to the Durham village of Merton. Within 2 years of the move, her father had a fatal accident, having fallen 150 feet to his death. So, with the breadwinner gone, also went their home, which was owned by the mining company for the express use of its workers. Which meant Mary, and her numerous siblings, were unceremoniously dumped on the street. In 1843, Mary's mother remarried, to another miner. She and the stepfather did not hit it off. At age 16, she escaped this hostile home life by taking the position of nurse in the home of a nearby village. She was essentially a live-in childminder. After 3 years she returned to her mother's home and trained as a dressmaker, another common occupation for women at that time. Her first husband was William Mowbray, whom she married in 1852, he was a colliery labourer. They subsequently moved to Plymouth in Devon. They never stayed anywhere for long though, they had returned to the County Durham area by 1856. William had managed to progress from a steam vessel's fireman to a colliery foreman. They had numerous children, but it is unclear exactly how many. Reports vary from between 5 and 9. Births, and particularly deaths, were not always officially recorded until 1874, when registration became compulsory, so it is difficult to know, given how many children died as infants and were never recorded. It is known that 3 children were included in a life insurance policy by William in about 1863. At least one child had already died by then, and another died in 1864 from gastric fever, a common cause of childhood death, at the time. Then, in January 1865, William died from an intestinal disorder, shortly followed by his 2-year-old son. Mary received a significant sum of money from the insurance, close to £4,000, $5,000, in today's money, and over half a year's wages for a manual labourer, at the time. She subsequently offloaded her young daughter into her mother's care, before taking a job as a hospital nurse in Sunderland, a role in which she ironically excelled. Mary was known to have had a tempestuous relationship with her first husband, with money being the primary source of Mary's fury. So, when he had an injury which kept him home and unemployed for a month, it is in hindsight not a surprise that his health rapidly deteriorated under Mary's care. This was a pattern that was set to repeat for the next 7 years. Her next suspected victim was a George Ward, an engineer. She met George while working at the Sunderland Infirmary, where he was recovering from serious illness, and they married shortly after he was discharged, in August 1865. Alas, George's health continued on a downward slope, until in October 1866, when he died from a long bout of paralysis and intestinal issues. Cause of death was recorded as cholera and typhoid, although the doctor was still surprised at his sudden death. Mary would console herself with a nice little life insurance payout. Mary quickly moved on, taking up the position of housekeeper to a widowed shipwright, James Robinson, in November 1866. James had 5 children, including an infant. His wife had died suddenly, shortly after the birth. This child was dead within a month of Mary's arrival, having succumbed to gastric fever. This caused George to turn to Mary for comfort, and soon Mary was pregnant. Soon after this, Mary's mother became ill with hepatitis, so she immediately returned to her mother's home in order to care for her. Initially, her mother's condition improved, but she soon began to suffer from stomach pains. 9 days after Mary's arrival, her mother was dead at age 54. Mary returned to George, bringing along her one surviving child, Isabella, from her previous marriage. However, it was not long before Isabella developed severe stomach pains and died. Then, 2 of Robinson's children also died under similar circumstances, all by April 1867. Surprisingly, this did not deter Robinson from marrying Mary in August of 1867. Their daughter was born in the November, and dead by March 1868. Their second child, George, was born in June 1869. Finally, Robinson started to suspect his new wife may not have his best interests at heart. She was discovered to have stolen over £50 from him, money which was supposed to be deposited at a bank, while managing to accrue a debt of £60, without his knowledge. Then there were the continued pleas for him to provide her with insurance cover for his life. When his children accused her of forcing them to pawn household belongings, the situation came to a head. Mary was told to leave the house, whereupon she departed, taking her new baby daughter with her. Living on the streets was something that frightened Mary. After only a short time, she paid a friend a visit, asking her to mind her child while she ran an errand. She did not return and the child was reunited with her father. She was now destitute, in a desperate situation, until, in early 1870, a friend introduced her to her brother, Frederick Cotton. That would prove to be a monumental mistake. Frederick Cotton was recently widowed when he met Mary. 2 of his 4 children had also died. His sister Margaret had been caring for his 2 remaining children, so was probably trying to relieve herself of that responsibility. In late March of 1870, Margaret died from an unknown stomach ailment. History was certainly repeating itself when Mary married the hapless Frederick on the 17th of September 1870, in Newcastle upon Tyne, becoming Mary Ann Cotton. This was the name that with which she would become infamous. The irony is that her marriage to Frederick was not valid because she was still married to James Robinson. Which meant she added bigamy to her list of offences. A son, Robert, was born in early 1871, but marital harmony was short-lived. A former lover of Mary's, Joseph Natras, whom she had met in between the death of William Mowbray and her marriage to George Ward, she had learned was now living in West Auckland, County Durham. At the time Mary originally met Natras, he had been married, so the romance didn't last. Now, he was without wife. Somehow, Mary persuaded Frederick to move the family to West Auckland, about 30 miles. Soon after, in December 1871, surprise surprise, yet another husband bit the dust from gastric fever. Natras quickly became Mary's lodger. Now, if Joseph thought he would be starting a new phase of his life with Mary, he was lamentably wrong. Soon after Natras was installed in her home, she took employment as a nurse once again. John Quickman, a brewery customs and excise man, had been recovering from smallpox when Mary entered the scene and, as was her custom, became pregnant by him soon after. 2 further mysterious deaths followed, namely, Mary's young son, Robert Cotton, and in quick succession, Joseph Natras. What's more, it transpired that Natras had changed his will, leaving everything, although this didn't amount to much, to Mary, shortly before his death. So heartless was Mary Ann Cotton that she even waited for Natras to die before burying her son, so she could bury them together, undoubtedly, to save money. At this point, she was just waiting to collect the insurance that would be due following the death of Frederick Cotton's only surviving son, Charles. He wasn't in obvious danger of dying by natural causes. According to a government official, Mary wanted to have him placed in the workhouse, so that she could marry Quickman, but was told she would have to go with him. He was too young to be admitted alone. She allegedly told the official that Charles would go like the rest of them. Mary was really starting to push her luck. She even had the audacity to send Charles to the chemist to purchase arsenic. He was refused, so she persuaded a neighbor to get it for her, which she did. That sealed poor Charles Cotton's fate. It was not long before he was also dead. The workhouse official she had spoken to just a few days before, happened to cross paths with Mary and was shocked to learn that Charles had died. This was her fateful mistake. The official was very suspicious and took his concerns to the police. The poison lady's reign of misery was coming to an end. The doctor who was in attendance when Charles died, refused to issue a death certificate until an inquest was held. Amazingly, the inquest concluded that there was no suspicious circumstances. However, the press had now gotten wind of Mary Ann Cotton's many deceased husbands and children. They dished all the dirt they could find on Mary, labeling her a poisoner. This then led to Quickman ending their relationship. Mary would have simply moved on to her next victim, were it not for a doctor who had kept stomach samples from Charles' autopsy. The press rumor-mongering instigated him to have them tested for arsenic. Consequently, the bodies of Charles Cotton and Joseph Natras were exhumed, which resulted in Mary Ann Cotton being charged with the murder of her stepson by means of arsenic poisoning. This was the only death for which Mary was officially held responsible. She was sentenced to death by hanging. There was a short reprieve as she was pregnant with, purportedly, her 13th child. Incredibly, she did have her supporters, who started a petition to save her. It was to no avail. She was hanged on the 24th of March, 1872. The executioner, William Calcraft, was notorious for his short drops. It took over 3 minutes for her to expire. Mary Ann Cotton holds several felonious records. The last woman in England to be hung following giving birth, and Britain's first known female serial killer, and nearly the most prolific overall, her suspected kill rate only surpassed by Harold Shipman over 100 years later. It is suspected that her victims total at least 20, but the true count will never be known. Although some of the deaths that are associated with her may have been the result of natural causes, it is impossible to know how many other unrecorded lives she potentially brought to a premature end.